agenda for the Land Use Committee. Our agenda is actually pretty much identical to what it was last Tuesday. However, we went over schedule with our informational meeting, so it was unfortunately canceled. So this gave us an opportunity to reschedule it, and it was important that we do it now because next month is full of budget meetings, and we would not have been able to address either of these issues until after the commission would have ruled on them, as well as the first reading and second reading. So those of you that came back special for this, I appreciate your attendance here today. So this meeting is officially called to order. The only deviation from last week's agenda is the approval of minutes, and we left that off because at the time that this was posted on Friday, we were not sure if we would have a majority of the committee members here. And I want to especially thank Councilor Jameson for changing his schedule to enable him to be here this afternoon. So Councilor Jameson, thank you. And also Councilor Staggers, thank you for coming in early today. Okay, the first item is the telecommunications. Excuse me, one other item here. We will meet for until 3:45 today, and at that time we will need to adjourn because we do have another 4 o'clock meeting that we need to get set up for. Okay, first item is telecommunication towers, the FCC final rule, acceleration of broadband development by improving wireless policies. And the agenda says Jeff Schmidt, but you can see we have Director Mike Cooper here today. And Mike, thank you for changing your schedule to present today. And I know that Jeff has a lot on his plate today with other items.
We'll see him later on today at 5 o'clock. Again, I am Mike Cooper with City Planning and Building Services. We have 2 proposals that we're going to review today with the committee that are proposed to go forward in terms of amendments to our Shade Places zoning ordinance. And Shauna Goldhammer will be going through both of those with the committee today. The first item that regarding telecommunication towers, this started out a few months ago that we began meeting with SDN Communications about their interest in looking at a new technology that would be developed within our community to expand and improve service to the community. So we'll go through that a little bit today about what that technology would look like and how it's being proposed to fit in with our zoning regulations. And also the FCC recently ruled regarding telecommunication towers as far as what authority local jurisdictions have in terms of regulation, restricting, not restricting. So what we are presenting today is something that we believe fits both what the industry is asking for to expand and improve their service within our community, and also would fit under the FCC guidelines as far as meeting the authority of local governments to regulate these types of micro towers. So that's my quick intro, and then Shauna will go through with you what we're talking about in terms of introducing a new technology that we call micro towers.
Thank you, Mike.
Good afternoon,
Welcome,
members of
Shauna.
Land Use Committee. I am so thrilled to be here. My name is Shauna Goldhammer. Excuse me, I'm the Zoning Enforcement Manager, and I've got 2 items tonight, or this afternoon, to present to you. I haven't been to the Land Use Committee in a while, so bear with me if I kind of jump through this. I'm pinch hitting, as Councilor Kiley indicated, for Jeff Schmidt in this presentation for the amendment that we're doing to the zoning ordinance for telecommunications and microcells. As Mike indicated, this ordinance is being prompted by some changes in FCC regulations. What we're doing is adding a few definitions to the zoning ordinance to accommodate microcells. Here is the ordinance definition that we will be including in zoning, and then a couple of pictures of what these microcells are. We also, provided by Vernon Brown at SDN, were provided the some of these microcells that have been kind of photoshopped into a site so you can get a feel for what those would look like. What this ordinance does is allows these microcells with some standards of 600-foot spacing in the UT1 form. We're also updating the UT2 form. That is where we currently have the telecommunication tower regulations. So again, here is the proposed changes on a slide for the UT1, which is basic utilities form, and then also UT2, which is primarily a form that accommodates towers, both telecommunication and broadcast type towers. And this ordinance amendment is proposed to go to the Planning Commission, and then we'll be back to the City Council for with the cycle of the Planning Commission items that come before you. First reading August 18th, with the second reading and public hearing September 1st.
Okay, and Mike?
Okay, we left out a couple things, but that's okay. Let's go back to the UT1.
Okay.
Let's do this together.
Okay.
Okay, one of the things that we want to, if you could just, there we go. Okay, so they can hear me.
Okay.
One of the things that we want to explain is that this is a new definition that would be added to the zoning ordinance, as Shauna said, but it's important for you to know that this microcell land use can potentially be cited within pretty much any place within the city as long as it meets these standards. So it's not limited to commercial or industrial only. It could go in multifamily or other zoning districts. And maybe you can just elaborate on where does the UT1 fit in now?
The UT1, excuse me, yes. UT1 form is allowed in all the zoning districts across the board. In the UT1, we have things like general utilities, the utility boxes, also community gardens is another thing that's allowed across the board throughout the city. So UT1 is the basic utilities provisions in the zoning ordinance. That form is allowed across the board in all zoning districts.
One of the reasons, again, that we're being asked to put this into the ordinance, not only because of what the industry is asking for, but with the FCC ruling, again, local jurisdictions cannot prohibit these completely. They have to provide for these to be located in a reasonable fashion. You can have some standards, which is what we're proposing that we would include with this amendment, but we are saying that within certain conditions and guidelines, they could potentially go pretty much anywhere within the city. So we just wanted to make sure that you as a committee knew this, and that as we go forward to the land use, or I should say, Planning Commission public hearing, as well as bringing it back to the City Council for a public hearing, that people understand that. And then the UT2 amendments is just to update the standards that we currently have for the larger towers that we have going up around the city. Nothing really changing there in terms of standards, but just clarifying, again, with some of the more up-to-date language that has come from the FCC.
Okay.
So there we go.
Great. Anything else to add, either one of you?
No.
Okay, questions, committee. Councilor Jamieson.
Shauna, since you're new to this, seems like, right? You're
Yes.
back, so let's
I'm
break
pinch hitting.
you in a little bit. Did I hear right? The FCC has these rules, and in essence, the city really doesn't have any say. It's just a matter of reasonableness. And what was that? What's our authority here in this situation?
We can come up with spacing criteria for design methods within our community, but we can't prohibit them. We can't say, no, you can't have them at all.
I see. So just some
So-
spacing.
But without some kind of standard,
Okay.
they could go a lot of places without any kind of oversight. So this provides us some standards for spacing and where how close to property lines they can be and that kind of thing.
If a utility company was going to put one in and wanted to put one in my front boulevard, right in front of my house, I wouldn't have no say in it as a homeowner.
You would have a similar say as you do with the utilities that are put in your boulevard now. It would be treated similarly as other utilities. So utility permitting would be still required. But you're right, you wouldn't, just a street light, you don't have discretionary to say I don't want one or I do want one. It has to meet warrants and be permitted by the Public Works Department. So if it's in the right of way. If it's on the private side of the property line, then it comes to a zoning permitting.
Okay, well,
Then you would have a say in it if it was on your property.
right, but still in front of my house on the boulevard would not be pleasant, and certainly.
That's why we have a standard. So we have a spacing criteria so they are not all in front of one person's house. We do have a spacing criteria of 600 feet proposed.
Councilor Staggers?
Yes. You mentioned the micro cells can be anywhere in Sioux Falls, theoretically. That's not true for the UT2, is it?
No, it is not.
What kind of basic restriction do we have on that for placement?
UT2 are primarily allowed in those more intense zoning districts, commercial, industrial type zoning districts. UT2 form is only allowed in those more intense zoning districts.
And I notice stealth design is required for UT2. Is stealth design required for UT1?
No, it is not. It's not in that standard.
I do believe if you look at the last paragraph for the UT1, if you can go back to that page, it does say it shall use materials, colors, textures, screening, and landscaping that is not in direct conflict with the natural setting or surrounding structures. So whether that's stealth-like or not, but it's to blend, in other words.
Yeah, stealth-like. I get that would be the intent without using the word stealth.
I guess one of the reasons I was asking is because stealth design does affect, at least my understanding, on the UT2, the performance of the tower. So in other words, my understanding is that it's not as effective, the tower, because of the special stealth design, like trying to make it a flagpole and all that kind of stuff.
The technology is rapidly changing, and just in the time that I've been permitting for towers and antennas, the technology has changed quite a bit, and the breadth of the technology and the coverage area of those antennas and what technology is put on those antennas is mind-boggling on how much it's changed just in the last 10 years. So I would say that it is ever-changing technology. I don't know that it is going in the direction of being less effective way for us to communicate.
Councilor Jameson?
Could you go back to the UT1 descriptions there? Within the right-of-ways or front yard setbacks, microcells shall be within 5 feet of the side yard lot line. So at least there's some discretion there. They're not going to just plop it right next to my sidewalk.
Correct.
Up to my house. The other thing is, where does the electricity come from to operate these?
That is a good question. I don't know that answer, but I can certainly find out by the time it comes back.
It would come with existing easements that we have for private utilities.
Right. So I'm just thinking if the street lights are on the one side of the road, that's an access point for them to get electricity. But if they're on the other side, it would just be private. So I would sense that if the likelihood is going to show up on a side where there's already street lights.
Right, and I would guess, see in this picture that's in the right-hand side of what you're looking at, that green utility box, that there's some opportunity there to put some base station type equipment in those utility boxes.
Generally, is going to be limited to one side of the roadway. That's what I was kind of getting at. I'm good for my house, but I'm sensing that there's on that left picture, that tower standing out there is not going to be welcome. So I'm just, and again, I want to get back to our authority and position here. I just want to be clear. I mean,
Right,
our
exactly.
position really is pretty minor because the FCC is going to oversee this, trumps us.
And as long as we want to use our cell phones and use technology that's wireless, this is the evil that comes with that convenience. If you want to say that it's not something that you're too thrilled about. It is the nature of the beast.
Thank you.
Councilor Staggers.
Is there a possibility that we can put the microcells on top of the streetlights?
It could be, yes. We do have examples of that being provided on the streetlights as well. If you go, let's see here, where's my, can you see clicker? I'll click. This application could be easily installed on top, above a light pole. But then again, that it depends on the provider and how it fits within their technology network.
But the city can make some money too in the process of renting it out.
Perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
Councilor Jamison.
I say we invite Vernon Brown back here and tell him that Councilor Staggers had a great idea that we require all these to be put on streetlights, because I think that's a great solution. Does SDN have any say over that? Or any other cell provider?
Yeah.
We've had those preliminary discussions with Public Works, so we will go back and relay that message again, maybe to clarify.
That's a great idea. Yep. I mean, I personally think.
It may not be the answer to all situations.
I understand.
Because again, if you look at the definition, we're looking at areas that have limited coverage, so. But we'll go back and take a look at how we can at least encourage that option maybe, or at least investigate it further.
Okay, great. Just a few comments of my own, and I think most of them have been brought out. I mean, the 5 foot of the side yard has to be set back from the side, so at least it's not going to be right in the middle of somebody's property. And it does need to be blend or be stealth-like. And I think the primary thing to remember here is that it is, as Shauna pointed out, it's going to improve our communications abilities. And some people would actually, that are in areas that have poor reception, are going to actually welcome these. Now, and I would agree that Councilor Staggers' suggestion of using the streetlights is intriguing, but I guess we would also need to know if it's going to provide for the sufficient amount of elevation. And obviously, there isn't a lot of pole left available above the light, you know, so whether they'd be able to utilize the pole below the light, and if that's high enough, those are all things that we would need to know, because actually we can't impair the functionality of the microcells, I would assume. And we're required to permit these. It's just a matter of what we're trying to do here today is just have some controls in place. Okay. Thank you very much. Good job, both of you. Okay, our next item is one that's quite dear to my heart here, and it's the billboard ordinance update. And Shauna Goldhammer with Zoning Enforcement is going to present this along with Mike Cooper, Director of Planning and Building Services. Welcome again.
Thank you. Mike said I was on my own, so it's you and me, Rick.
He's passing the buck again.
You and me. You may be aware that there was a moratorium placed on the permitting of billboards. On March 17th, the City Council had the first reading of an ordinance that placed that moratorium on permitting. This 6-month moratorium allowed the time for the citizens to gather as a study group and analyze and review our current situation and see if we could do billboards and off-premise signs differently and perhaps even better. The group met 5 times, and we offered times at these meetings for public comment. Staff support for this 5-member study group, which was 2 citizens, well, they were all citizens, I guess. Rick Kiley was kind enough to chair these meetings. We had a member of the Planning Commission on the study group, a member of the Zoning Board of Adjustments, as well as 2 concerned citizens that stepped up to the plate and met these 5 times. Other municipal ordinances were reviewed, including Des Moines, Omaha, Minneapolis, Lincoln, Rochester, and Rapid City. The focus group studied on locations where billboards would be appropriate in the context of forms and also existing transportation corridors. The study group was also concerned with future expansion of billboard opportunities. The study group provides this draft of billboard opportunity districts. There are 10 of them. And in your ordinance, and you do have a copy of that. Denise, thank you for printing that out for me. You can see that Section 3 is the establishment of these 10 opportunity districts, and they're indicated on this map that you see before you. In addition to the general regulations for off-premise signs, Section 3 of the ordinance also contains 3 provisions that were very important to the study group. First, that any changes to the opportunity district that are established in the future, in other words, when the 11th opportunity district comes into play, that those ordinances would follow the rezoning process. That's for the application, filing fee, notice, the letters, publishing in the paper, posting of signs, also the 2 public hearings that are required when we go through the rezoning process. So that would give the public a notice when new billboard opportunities would be in front of the City Council. The second criteria that is being established here is that the opportunity billboard signs would be on lots that are contiguous within that, contiguous to the right-of-way that is described and shown on the map that is up on the screen. And third and finally, and this was very important to the residents that attended the meetings, and yes, believe it or not, we actually had residents come to these meetings. Usually it's just signed contractors, so we were pretty thrilled about that. The future opportunity districts yet to be established in the ordinance would require additional standards for separation of sensitive uses, and this is things like single-family, places of worship, schools, daycares, and public service facilities and parks. The general regulations, you can see in your ordinance that Section 4 is incorporating some basics of measurement, setbacks of the sign, and continuing to require the images be static and not automated. Or animated, excuse me. They can be automated. In other words, you can switch the images, but they have to be static images. They can't have animation. So because this ordinance was drafted by the committee, we are moving it forward, and I would be happy to answer any questions that you have about the process, our hearings that we had. It wasn't hearings, they were open meetings that we requested people to have discussions with us. So, okay. And if you have anything to add, Councilor Kiley, I would welcome.
I'll wait for questions from the councilors, and then I have a few points that I'll discuss. Yes. Okay. Thank you very much, Shauna. Mm-hmm. Councilor Staggers.
Shauna, why not animation? I mean, this is the wave of the future, and here we're stopping this.
This is an industry standard that's nationwide. The animation of images on digital billboards is a safety concern for traffic, and it is regulated by the industry themselves, that they recognize that this would be a safety concern if we had movies or cartoons or actual animation, the movement of on these larger billboards. So that is why the safety concern with the traveling public.
So this is coming from the billboard industry then, no animation?
Correct, yes.
Councilor Jamison.
Well, first I have to say that the effort of the committee is very much appreciated by the council, I'm sure, and certainly by this councilor. Councilor Kiley stepped up and took this under his wing and I think did a fine job from what I can tell, reading through the details, looking at the map. Shauna, thank you for your involvement, and city staff. With that said, there's just a couple questions I have about the map. That's, my eyesight is getting a little worse, but tell me what the key means. I get the billboard, the fact that there's probably a billboard there. That's what that little purple red dot means, right?
Okay, yes, yes.
What about the ground? What does that mean?
They are off-premise signs, but they are not the caliber of a billboard. And let me give you a good example. Along Minnesota Avenue, up by the airport, the Air National Guard has a sign close to Minnesota. That is off-premise, and so it is considered an off-premise sign, but it's lower to the ground, so that we categorize those as ground signs.
Okay, very good. And this map is really the foundation of where billboards are going to be allowed and grow to and move on to. And did I read it right that 229 has a limit of number of boards?
Yes.
Even though it's highlighted in an area, have we met that limit already of the 21 or whatever it was?
The last time we did a count, there was 19. And the 21 limit along that stretch of transportation corridor has been long established as having a cap, if you will. There is quite a few residential zoning districts that abut that corridor. So not only do they have to be in the corridor, but they also need to meet the general regulations.
Well, it's kind of already limited just by those other limitations, really.
Correct.
Gotcha.
Right.
If you were to look at this map, where do you see the opportunities for more billboards to go?
Right. Along Louise Avenue, the Louise 26th corridor, there may be some opportunities there. There may be some along Arrowhead Parkway, where you can see that there's, it goes out to 6 Mile Road. Again, they have to meet the 600 feet spacing criteria that was already in existence. But what we really tried to do was to be able to have billboards along the transportation corridors and not be out there kind of on their own like the one on 41st and Sycamore is. With this opportunity districts, there are 13 signs out of the 192 that would be considered legal nonconforming. In other words, they are not located within an opportunity district. They are allowed to remain as long as they are out there and not removed, they can remain. They're required to be maintained. We're talking about going forward and where there would be opportunities for billboards in the future.
If I could, just one last one on the, say those ones that are non-conforming. If the landowner decides not to renew the lease to the billboard company, is the billboard company then required to remove the sign? Or what happens to that structure after?
Right. The lease of the land between the landowner and the sign is a private negotiation. And it would depend on what they come to terms with, because the sign is owned by someone separate, usually, than the person who owns the land. So it would depend on their negotiation, and hopefully there's some kind of clause in that lease when the lease terminates, how they handle that sign. Okay. Would be part of that contract.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, then I'd just like to take the opportunity to make a few comments of my own. And first of all, I'd like to publicly thank our study group members, Sean Urban and Greg Neitzert, who is present here this afternoon. Thank you very much for your time, Greg. Dana Losky and Kim James, because as Sean had indicated, we had five meetings, which required extra time on their part. As well as time studying in between. So they did a tremendous job, and I'm appreciative of that. I know the staff is as well, and the citizens should be. And again, Shauna, you did a great job. Thank you very much. And Jeff Schmidt, who's not here today, had participated as well, as Shauna had mentioned. And Mike Cooper, obviously the director, was overseeing what was going on and even filled in on occasion. And then they were all watched by our Assistant City Attorney, Danny Brown. Danny Brown was just making sure that we're going to remain on the straight and narrow, because billboards, like telecommunication towers, we cannot prohibit them. We have to be reasonable in the way in which we, I guess, allow them throughout the city. And I believe that we have come up with reasonable uses here as a result of our study. And then others too, the sign company reps were present for all 5 meetings, and that Shauna did a great job of making sure that they had received email communications inviting them to the meetings. And then we did have a number of citizens that participated in every meeting, and they'd had the opportunity to address the group at all the meetings, with the exception of the first one, because the first one was, by nature, was just basically informational. But then after that, they contributed, and we actually incorporated some of their ideas and wishes in our final findings as well. So again, I thank all of them for attending. I'd just like to address the animation part that Councilor Staggers had brought up. With my traffic safety background, yes, I would be concerned if we were playing movies or some of the entertaining commercials that we see on TV, because I'd hate to have a motorist looking up and enjoying what was on the screen above them and go through the intersection, run a red light, and take out a pedestrian or a motorcyclist or another automobile. So I think it is a safety factor, and as Shauna had indicated, the sign companies themselves realize that there are some drawbacks regarding that. And the opportunity districts do a good job of, one of our primary focuses as we started was to somehow regulate signs from popping up in what I've always referred to as our pocket commercial areas, an area which is predominantly residential, but you have a convenience store located at the corner and maybe another one opposite from it. As it was, we had a few signs a few months ago that showed up in these areas, and that's what generated the moratorium in the first place. And so I think this is going to do a good job of illustrating where the signs can go without restricting them and their use. One other thing that I'd just like to point out is that, again, place special emphasis that any expansion or contraction of any of the designated opportunity districts would be considered a zoning district change and shall follow the process of a change in zoning. And so, in other words, the individuals that would be affected would have to be notified in that case and have an ability to address their concerns at the scheduled meetings. And then lastly, the 500 feet of separation from sensitive land use, and because cemeteries and historic districts are not included in the definition of a sensitive land use, we added that so that we didn't have to necessarily reinvent the wheel in terms of the definition for a sensitive land use. But a sensitive land use is uses that need to be separated by a reasonable distance from certain incompatible uses. Sensitive land uses include all DD and AD forms and the following uses: churches, elementary, middle, or high schools, daycare, public use facilities, and parks. So that was one of the things that the citizens were pretty adamant about, and so that was incorporated as a result. And it also came from suggestions from within the committee as well. So I guess, Shauna, unless you have anything else, is there anybody else that had a comment that they would like to make on this particular agenda topic?
Or any other questions of me by the committee.
I have one. If I could, Shauna, the process again, this will go on to Planning Commission?
Planning Commission, yes, that is correct. And then goes to the City Council for first reading, and then the second reading is September 1st, and that is also a public hearing.
And barring any obstacles along the way, we'll be within our moratorium deadline dates?
The new ordinance under this schedule would be this proposal should be effective September 26th. And the moratorium is in effect until, I believe, October 8th.
October 8th, right.
Very good, thank you.
Right, the Planning Commission is August 5th, and the first reading is scheduled for August 18th. I think on the schedule it said the 16th, but Tuesday's the 18th, so I think that would then push the effective date back just 2 days to the 28th. But the point is, it's going to be effective before the moratorium was set to expire. So that was the other challenging part. We needed to make progress within that time frame.
Everybody needs a deadline.
And they did a good job. They did an excellent job. Councilor Staggers.
Yeah, in accordance with this ordinance, with the 10 so-called opportunity districts, what's the maximum number of billboards we're going to have in Sioux Falls?
What's the maximum number? There is no established cap with this ordinance, so.
Have down within 500 feet, and you can only have them in this certain area. I mean, have you calculated, I know there's nothing in the ordinance specific as to how many there are going to be, but in accordance with the ordinance, how many billboards can we have in Sioux Falls?
That's difficult to say, and here's why. Not all property owners want a billboard on their property. So there may be an opportunity for a sign located there, but that property owner is not interested in having one. So it would be difficult to say how many potential signs could go out there. There's a very competitive sign industry in our community, and they work out the deal with the landowner. And as a matter of fact, putting a cap on the total number is one method that some of the communities that we looked at had done, but we decided in Sioux Falls that that would not fit within our community, that this would be the best way to handle the first step in recognizing that billboards should have an opportunity.
So we don't know theoretically the opportunity available if this ordinance passes as to how many billboards could be put up by these companies.
I wouldn't venture a guess of that, no.
I think another key point, Councilor Staggers, is that they're not allowed to go within 600 feet
Yes,
any closer than that.
Yeah.
And as Shauna had pointed out, not all property owners, if there is an area where one could potentially go, they may or may not choose or elect to do that. So it would be pretty difficult. However, on Interstate 229, we did mention they are capped there at 21 signs along the 229 corridor. But it would be difficult to come up with a definitive.
And sometimes signs come down, and because usually these leases are long-term, 30 years, 40 years, and the property owner decides that they don't want the billboard anymore. So that would be a potential site, but there isn't a sign there, nor would there be one.
Okay, thank you very much. Unless there's any other questions, comments about billboards?
I understand, well, that some of these billboard companies have some objections to this. Can you tell us what their objections are?
I have not heard any objections communicated at the meetings. I'm sure that they will come to the public hearings and give their input at that time. But honestly, I hadn't heard anything. They were concerned at one time in early drafts. There was provisions to not allow the Zoning Board of Adjustments to grant variances in the spacing criteria, which is in the code now. And early proposals, we were going to take that out, thinking that they could get around the spacing criteria by getting a variance. The sign contractors wanted that to remain in there. So this final draft does not have anything, any changes to the provisions or the jurisdiction of the Zoning Board of Adjustments. So that is one thing that they wanted to have stay the same, and it is staying the same.
And I would agree with Shauna's assessment regarding that. Actually, both sides of this issue, there was give and take both ways. I mean, both sides gave a little bit and received a little bit. So I think it was a process that worked out quite well. Any other comments? All right, well, that's going to lead us to our open discussion. Before we get into that, I'd just like to say I know that there was a little bit of confusion regarding what was on our agenda here today. So that, and our whole intent in meeting, having this rescheduled for 3 o'clock instead of the normal following the informational meeting, was that we could get this in as I had indicated before, and the agenda items were the same. So open discussion will be open. It's available now, and it will be limited to the committee members here. Yes, Councilor James.
I've got 3 items. First, I didn't even look up, and I noticed just a minute ago that Vernon Brown was actually here, a former colleague, Councilor Brown. And unbeknownst to me, he was texting me the answers to all my questions. That's Vernon for you, always doing... Anyway, one of the things that we missed was that those micro towers would be used in the highly dense populated areas, like apparently at the fairgrounds when there's a fair going on, or in the downtown area. I don't know if all of you got those text messages, but very good. I thought I should share that with you. Let's see. Number 2 is we just reviewed the billboard ordinances, and the whole reason that came up was. It was a change in shaped places that allowed for that billboard to be put out at 41st and Sycamore. At those, I think they're called commercial nodes. Is that what they're called? Nodes. And it was only, though, that after we saw it that we realized that didn't fit. Some of us maybe knew that there was a problem with billboards, but not everybody. And we finally figured it out after the board went up that, that doesn't fit. And I think the committee worked hard and found a solution. So what I'm worried about is what else is in shaped places that maybe we haven't seen yet, that we don't quite understand, that maybe we need to review. Just last Tuesday, we had an enormous amount of rezones come forward that seemed kind of maybe simple in nature, but I'm just wondering if we're missing something else until we see it. So I'm just maybe considering whether we want to review some of the implications of shaped places on a different scale. So I just bring that up to the body. The third item is the boulevard ordinance. Obviously, we talked about that a few weeks ago. The council, I think, in general supports deregulation of that ordinance as it is, removing the restrictions, making sure that a safety aspect is included in some way or another, but it's going to be probably several months before we ever get back together based on going through the budget process. And I wanted to kind of keep some things happening in the meantime, but I just wanted to bring it up that I think we've agreed as a council during the information, we'll put this on our agenda. It hasn't been forgotten. And I know individuals who contacted me regarding it. Some want to be a part of it. Others want to make sure we enforce it. But at the end of the day, we need to get to something that the council supports and the administration will enforce. So I think there's a couple moving pieces here. One with the Public Works Department, traffic to determine some safety considerations. I think that was paramount with the council. As well as just some basic elimination of most of the text involved in the ordinance, I think would serve us well. So if I guess just in the next couple of months, somehow we could maybe just at least keep talking about it and look for this to pop up on our agenda after we get through the budget, and then have language to consider, and with some other input from individuals and the departments involved. I just want to get that ball rolling is all.
Right.
I guess when it comes to specifically the boulevards and things like that, we talked about that on the city council back during the time of Dave Munson. And, well, obviously nothing was really done. And here we are in 2015, and I think we've had one or two people really upset about this. Does that justify really going back? Because we've had a history now of a number of years where everybody's letting everybody alone.
Right.
And now we want to start coming up with regulations.
Yes,
If I could, the real impetus behind all of this is that I would say I received a phone call from an individual who is not happy about a neighbor's property who has flowers in the boulevard.
Sorry.
Permit buys donuts for everybody, I think. Cookies
I
or
really
something.
should.
How many times?
Don't go
This is-
swinging from a
yes.
vine now.
I've turned it off so nobody can.
All right, as Jane would say.
I agree with what you just said. I
So
should
the idea is the individual called me and said, how is it that you can have an ordinance on your books and you don't enforce it?
still, that's normal.
I said, well, that isn't acceptable. We couldn't have, you could take it from boulevards today to other things tomorrow. If we're going to have it on the books, we need to enforce it. It was absolutely a challenge for us the last time we tried to address it. And sensing from what I hear from the council is that, yeah, let's get this thing to rest. Let's put it in a position where it's enforceable and acceptable. And from what I'm sensing is going to be a general deregulation of those boulevards. So as you said, have we had any complaints over the years? I haven't seen many issues other than a few phone calls, but it's absolutely imperative if we have an ordinance on the book that we make it enforceable or we change it.
Or get rid of it.
And that's
preferably.
and I think that's where we're headed, is to generally get rid of it.
And if I can just add to that and then wrap things up here because we're running out of time. It was actually heard back in October of 2013, and at that point it was determined, and we discussed it again last year too, it would return in the future. No date was given, but I think that date is now upon us, obviously, because it has been brought up as a topic, so that it is something that we will get scheduled. And as in terms of when we can get that officially on the agenda, and again, I apologize if there was any confusion about that being an agenda item here today. It never was our intent to have that on there, but we're glad those of you who are attending with interest in that you are here this afternoon. But it is our intent to potentially get that on here this fall, because as I mentioned earlier, August is filled up with budget meetings, so it would be September or October at the earliest before we could get that on the agenda. Any other items for open discussion? In that case, this meeting is adjourned.